A snowy, windswept night in Halifax. March 29th, 2015. Inside the cockpit of Air Canada Flight 624, two experienced pilots are guiding their Airbus A320 toward the runway. The final approach is fully automated, perfectly stabilized. Every number glowing on their screens confirms it. They are exactly where they should be. The aircraft is descending smoothly, locked onto the preset flight path angle. It's a routine landing, just like countless others they've flown. But outside, in the swirling snow and darkness, a silent and invisible error is growing. It's not a mistake of skill or a failure of machinery. It's an error of assumption, a misplaced trust in the system. Tonight, that trust will lead them to a place no pilot ever wants to be, short of the runway. This is the story of how a technically perfect approach became a near-fatal disaster. It's a story about a 100-foot lie hidden in plain sight. A lie told not by a faulty instrument, but by a correct one. It reveals the dangerous gap that can open up between what our sophisticated automation does and what we, as humans, assume it is doing. Let's go back to the cockpit. The pilots of Flight 624 are using a standard procedure for this type of non-precision approach, known as the flight path angle mode. The concept is simple and elegant. You tell the autopilot the angle you want to descend at in this case. -3.5 degrees, and the plane obliges, creating a constant, stable descent path toward the runway. It's designed to reduce pilot workload, and it works beautifully. Air Canada's own procedures instructed pilots to set this angle, and, after a certain point in the approach, to rely on it without continuously cross-checking their altitude against distance markers on their charts. They were following the rules, flying by the book. The pilots did their job correctly. They captured the flight path, confirmed their settings, and monitored the descent. The autopilot was also doing its job correctly, maintaining that precise -3.5 degree angle relative to the air mass around it. Everything was technically correct. So what went wrong? The problem was the wind. As Flight 624 descended, it encountered a shifting headwind that was stronger than forecasted. Now, an autopilot in flight path angle mode does uncompensate for wind's effect on the plane's ground track. Think of it like this. You're walking down a moving escalator. Your speed relative to the escalator steps is constant, but if the escalator itself speeds up or slows down, your actual progress over the ground changes. The increasing headwind was effectively slowing the plane's forward progress over the ground. But the autopilot, focused only on maintaining its 3.5 degree descent angle through the air, kept the plane descending at the same rate. The result was a subtle but critical change. The descent path became steeper relative to the ground. For every mile they traveled forward, they were losing more altitude than they should have. The plane was being silently dragged below the correct, safe glide slope. Inside the cockpit, there were no alarms, no flashing red lights. The instruments all showed a perfect -3.5 degree descent. The numbers looked right. The automation was working. The lie was invisible. This is where the human element becomes so critical. Standard aviation practice for generations has been to cross-check altitude versus distance. At 10 miles out, you should be at this altitude. At 5 miles out, you should be here. It's a fundamental safety check. But the airline's procedure for this specific automated mode actively discouraged this cross-check after a certain point, called the final approach fix. The procedure was built on the assumption that the automation would handle it. This seemingly minor procedural detail removed a vital layer of safety. It created a blind spot, not just for these two pilots, but for any pilot following the same rules. They had been trained to trust the automation, and that's exactly what they did. As they got closer to the airport, another factor came into play. The visual cues from the ground were misleading. Due to the snowy conditions and perhaps a misunderstanding of the pilot's request, the powerful runway approach lights were left on a dim setting, level 4 out of 5. In the blowing snow and darkness, these dimmer lights made the runway appear farther away than it actually was. This is a well-known visual illusion. So, while their instruments told them everything was normal, their eyes were also being tricked. The combination was insidious. The automation was pulling them low, and The visual environment was confirming the false reality. The Earth was rising up to meet them, and they had no idea. In the final seconds of the flight, one of the pilots did notice something was wrong. The visual picture just didn't feel right. He called for a go-around, the procedure to abort the landing. It was the correct call, made in the nick of time. The engine spooled up, and the plane began to climb. But it was too late. Just seconds after the go-around was initiated, the aircraft's landing gear struck an antenna array located about 300 meters, or nearly 1,000 feet, before the start of the runway. The impact was violent. The main landing gear was ripped from the fuselage. The plane then slammed into the ground, sliding on its belly across the frozen terrain. It sheared through power lines, causing the entire airport to plunge into darkness. One engine and a wing were torn off before the battered fuselage finally skidded to a halt, just short of a taxiway. Miraculously, despite the terrifying crash and the extensive damage to the aircraft, all 148 passengers and 5 crew members survived. 25 people were taken to the hospital, but there were no fatalities. They had survived a crash that, by all rights, could have been catastrophic. The investigation that followed, conducted by the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, peeled back the layers of this accident. It wasn't about pointing fingers at the pilots. In fact, the TSB concluded the pilots had flown the approach exactly as they were trained to, following their company's approved procedures. The problem was the procedure itself. The investigation highlighted the critical flaw in relying on the flight path angle mode without mandatory altitude checks. It exposed how a procedure designed for convenience had inadvertently created a trap. The airline had assumed that the flight path angle would provide a safe and constant path to the runway, but it failed to account for the significant effect of wind variations. This wasn't an isolated issue. The TSB found that this was a known risk, yet the procedures hadn't been updated to mitigate it. Following the accident, both Air Canada and Airbus took immediate action. Procedures were changed to mandate continuous monitoring of altitude against distance on all approaches. The set it and forget it philosophy was abandoned. The story of Air Canada Flight 624 serves as a powerful reminder about the complexities of modern aviation. We have incredible tools at our disposal, autopilots that can fly with a precision that was unimaginable just a few decades ago. But automation is a tool, not a substitute for fundamental airmanship. It follows the rules it's given, without context or judgment. It can't tell you when the assumptions behind those rules are wrong. It can't feel that something isn't right. That remains the unique and irreplaceable job of the human pilot. This incident shows how a chain of small, seemingly insignificant factors, a procedural shortcut, a forecast that's slightly off, a dim set of lights can align to create a major accident. It's a lesson that extends far beyond the cockpit. In any field where we rely on complex systems, we must never stop asking questions. We must never stop cross-checking. And we must never allow our trust in technology to become a blind spot. The pilots of Flight 624 were put in an impossible situation, betrayed by a system they were taught to trust. Their story is a crucial lesson, written not in a textbook, but in the scars left on a Halifax runway, reminding us that even in an automated world, human oversight is the final and most important safety net. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into aviation. We'll see you next time.